One.
Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. That's right. This is Life on Earth, and thank you for joining me. Welcome to Life on Earth. My God, episode 63. It took me this long to get to abundance and the abundance mindset. And why? Why would I have waited until episode 63 to start on this topic? And the answer is the book just came out. The book that you have got to read, Superabundance. This is awesome. Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet by Marian L. Tupy and Gail L. Pooley. Those names, I don't know, got to get used to that. Welcome to Life on Earth. As you know, weekly show talking about life on Earth. Ayn Rand said in her 1974 speech before West Point Military Academy, near the end of the speech, Philosophy Who Needs It, she said, in regard to my philosophy, formally I call it objectivism, but informally I call it a philosophy for living on Earth. Could not be a better topic for this conversation. Today on Life on Earth, it's time we considered the abundance, the superabundance of human life on Earth. This long-awaited book, Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet. Normally, I would hold the book up and show it to you, but I've only got the Kindle version right now. Don't have the Dead Tree version. I'll have a few other books to show off before we're done. Marian Tupy, if you don't already know, is the editor of humanprogress.org. I have recommended this website before for anybody who is not as passionate about abundance, as excited about the future, as optimistic as I am. It's because you haven't been checking out humanprogress.org on a regular basis. It's part of the Cato Institute's Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity. I know some people get a little skeptical when they hear Cato. I get a little bit skeptical when I hear Cato, but you need to follow the work that these good people are doing. The other author, Gail Pooley, is an associate professor of business management at Brigham Young University in Hawaii and a senior fellow with the Discovery Institute. He serves on the board at humanprogress.org. The book's organized into 3 parts. Part 1, Thanos' deadly idea from antiquity to the present and to beyond. Now, you Marvel fans, which probably means everybody out there, is right away, Thanos, is that a Marvel? Of course it's a Marvel reference. Real quick here to lay out the 3 parts. Part 2, measuring abundance, new methodology, empirical evidence, in-depth analysis. And part 3, human flourishing and its enemies. So I'm just going to read a bit from the introduction to the book and give a few quotes from part 1 here and talk about this. So good. Introduction. Generations of people throughout the world have been taught to believe that there is an inverse relationship between population growth and the availability of resources, which is to say that as the population grows, resources become more scarce. In 2021, for example, we were told that, quote, the world's rapidly growing population is consuming the planet's natural resources at an alarming rate. It is estimated that the world currently needs 1.6 Earths to satisfy the demand for natural resources, a figure that could rise to 2 planets by 2030. And the authors of Superabundance ask, is that really true? And they give a brain teaser here. This is fun, so I'll read it real quick. Imagine it's 1980, so 42 years ago, and you're getting married. Your parents invite 100 guests, 100, to the wedding reception. The reception costs them $100 a person, or $10,000 in total. Now, fast forward to 2018. So you go forward 38 years. Now it's your turn to throw a wedding reception for your child. The guest list has increased by 72%. You know, some of the old folks are no longer around, but the cousins have grown in numbers. That means you are now catering for 172 people. Now, if the price per guest had remained the same, your bill would amount to $17,200. But instead, the bill comes to $4,816, which is less than half of what your parents paid for you. And you ask the caterer, how is this possible? And the caterer responds that for every 1% increase in attendance, the bill fell by 1%. The number of guests rose by 72%, but then the bill has declined by 72%. Now, surely things like that don't happen in real life, or do they? In fact, this is exactly what has happened to the abundance of 50 basic commodities between 1980 and 2018. Over that period, the world's population did grow by 71.2%. Think about that. We're talking about a planet with 8 billion people. Population grew by 71.2%, yet the average working time required to earn enough money to buy 50 kinds of energy and food and raw materials and metals fell by 81.6%. Put differently, the amount of effort required to buy one basket of those 50 commodities in 1980 bought 3.5 baskets in 2018. As though they explain later that abundance occurs when the nominal hourly income increases faster than the nominal price of a resource. Now, I know there are people who think, well, I don't make that much more money than I used to. And damn, I've seen all these prices go up. Run the numbers. Actually read this book. Then you don't have to run the numbers. They will do the work for you. A little later, they say, consider proper nutrition, because here we were talking about commodities, but let's look at the boots on the ground here. Consider proper nutrition, high rates of literacy, widespread availability of antibiotics, and countless other conveniences now so commonly available in modern life. What does this sound like? Well, if you heard it, it sounds like the episode that Amy Nasir and I did on Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, and later the book on Rationality, how things are improving all of the time. Now, throughout the book, they're going to measure things in time prices. A time price denotes the length of time a person has to work to earn enough money to buy something. It is the money price divided by the hourly income. Money prices are expressed in dollars and cents, while time prices are expressed in hours and minutes. There are 3 reasons they do this. They avoid the contention and subjectivity of commonly used inflation adjustments. Time prices are more fully capturing the effects of innovation, and time prices are independent of currency fluctuations. And we've all done this. We've looked at, well, sure, we pay more for electric light right now. And yet we pay 80,000th of the work, of the effort it would take to provide light after dark versus those of 2,000 years ago. Or we pay 1/60th of what they paid just 200 years ago to provide candlelight at night. If you do these in terms of the actual work that you do to get the things that you get a more realistic idea of how much abundance there is in the world. Now, they open the chapters within the 3 sections of the book with quotes. And then we mentioned Thanos for the Marvel fans out there, and the film Avengers: Infinity War, where our bad guy decides to eliminate half of the population of the universe because, of course, resources are limited. I'm not going to give any spoilers of what actually happens, but the quote that they use for chapter 1 here, this is great. I have printouts because, again, I just have the Kindle version here. Are we in the midst of progress, or are we facing the apocalypse, is the title of the chapter. And the quote is, I can't do Thanos' voice, but little one, it's a simple calculus. This universe is finite. Its resources are finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. It needs correction. And then they open the chapter saying there is nonetheless no shortage of positive trends in the world today. Unfortunately for the apocalyptists, and fortunately for the rest of us, the state of the world continues to improve along many different dimensions. Astonishingly, these improvements have become most pronounced over the same period that saw the number of apocalyptic movies and predictions explode. And I'll just give a couple examples here before I move on. They say, let's start with income. For richer societies can afford more food, better healthcare, higher levels of education, and so on. Between 1950 and 2020, and I love that they do 1950 to 2020, how many times have you heard people complain that in 1950, a single income could provide a house and a car and a nice lifestyle for a family? Between 1950 and 2020, the average income per person in the United States rose from $15,183 to $62,941, or 315. These are all in 2018 dollars. 315%. The population-weighted average global income per person rose from $4,158 to $16,904, or 307%. 307% increase globally. Increased prosperity was not confined to developed nations. Some of the world's poorest countries benefited handsomely from income growth between 1950 and 2020. The growth in Chinese incomes, and we'll talk about China, the growth in Chinese incomes from $688 to $14,009 amounts to a staggering 1,936%. India saw its average income rise from $842 to $6,649, or 690%. Now, I'll skip the income. I think the point is clear. We're talking hundreds of percent of increase here. Now, consider the population-weighted average global life expectancy. As objectivists, life is the standard of value. If we're going to measure anything, it's going to be life expectancy, which rose from 52.6 years in 1960 to 72.4 years in 2017, or 37.6%. In the United States, it rose from 69.8 to 78.5, or 13%. In the UK, 71 to 81, or 14%. Staggering. It just blows my mind. Here, I'll give you a quick peek into chapter 2, and then I'll go back to my notes here. Chapter 2, Thanos's intellectual and practical progenitors. How did we get into this? Well, a lot of it starts, of course, with Malthus, Thomas Robert Malthus. So, chapter 2 rightly begins with a quote from Malthus, who said, "The power of population is so superior to the power of earth to produce sustenance for man that premature death must, in some shape or other, visit the human race." We all have heard of Malthusianism. Thomas Malthus predicting the end of the world. Real quick from the opening of that chapter. Likewise, human beings were much more exposed to the vicissitudes of fortune in the past. Over time, however, people have developed sophisticated forms of cooperation that increase their wealth and chances of survival. Consider, for example, trade and exchange. In his 1776 magnum opus, The Wealth of Nations, the Scottish economist Adam Smith wrote about humanity's, quote, propensity to truck, barter, and exchange one thing for another. Trade is common to all men, and to be found in no other race of animals, which seem to know neither this nor any other species of contracts. Well, nobody ever saw a dog make a fair and deliberate exchange of one bone for another with another dog. Nobody ever saw one animal by its gestures and natural cries signify to another, "Oh, this is mine, that yours, and I'm willing to give this for that." Unquote, Adam Smith. Somebody will object that we've seen sort of pseudo-trade behavior behind animals, but that is not the point. So yeah, part one, Thanos' deadly idea from antiquity to the present. And they do a great job going over this idea of resource scarcity and the finite nature of resources on the planet. Part two is measuring abundance, where they introduce a new methodology. Again, their focus is on the time measure of resources, how much time it takes to earn the capital or the money to get a resource, and then do an in-depth analysis on that. I'll just read a bit from the summary of part two. The rest of it I'm going to do real quick. In the second part of the book, they introduce the Simon Abundance Framework to measure the change in abundance relative to change in wages. To use a pizza analogy, personal resource abundance measures the size of a slice of pizza per person. Population resource abundance measures the size of the entire pie. Population resource abundance analysis shows that resources have been growing more abundant, get these rates here, growing more abundant by over 4% per year, thereby doubling every 16 years or so. Moreover, showed that humanity is experiencing superabundance. Now, this is where we're going to define what are they talking about when they talk about superabundance. A condition where abundance is increasing, well, that would be abundance, resources increasing, but abundance is increasing at a faster rate than population is growing. We're not only producing more and more all the time, we're producing more and more at a greater rate all the time, which vindicates Julian Simon's observation with which they started in chapter 3. Our supplies of natural resources are not finite in any economic sense. Well, where did Julian Simon say that? He said that in this book, The Ultimate Resource, in which he says natural resources and energy are getting less scarce. Pollution in the US has been decreasing. The world's food supply is improving, and population growth has long-term benefits. Julian Simon, The Ultimate Resource. Well, that must be pretty recent since people haven't got the message yet. No, that came out in 1981. Julian Simon, famous for the Simon Ehrlich bet, in which Julian Simon bet Paul Ehrlich, our famous doomsayer, who for some reason people still listen to. Ehrlich was saying, we're going to run out of everything. We've got to do radical things because we're running out of everything. And Julian Simon said, no. And he wagered him. He said, I will bet you that in 10 years, there will be more of everything and at lower prices. And Ehrlich took him on. I think he needed a little bit of prodding because Simon famously said, look, here's a list of whatever it was, 10 or 50 or a bunch of different resources. You, Mr. Ehrlich, you pick whichever resources you think are going to be more expensive, harder to get in 10 years. Ehrlich did that. He picked 5 of them out. And sure enough, after 10 years, every single one of them had gotten cheaper. Julian Simon, what a guy. Part 3 of the book is Human Flourishing and its enemies. Its enemies. How can there be enemies of human flourishing? Well, in the objectivist community, we know the answer to that. From the summary, we noted that unlike non-human animals, people flourished by developing sophisticated ways of cooperating and gaining knowledge. Incidentally, close the quote for a second. If that sounds social, I will justify that claim in a moment. Because we do not, because we believe in the division of labor. We believe in cooperation as well as creation and competition. Going on, not only do we trade more intensively and extensively than other species do, more importantly, we constantly innovate. Unfortunately, the reasons for human flourishing, liberalism in its original European sense, not the current American sense, openness, inclusivity, are neither widely known nor appreciated. Parts of humanity have hardly begun to experience historically unprecedented improvements in longevity, nutrition, education, and so on, before competing conceptions of human flourishing emerged. what are competing conceptions of human flourishing? Well, obviously, it's not good enough that all of us are doing better. We need to be doing equally better. We need more diversity, more equity, more inclusion. On Wikipedia, a website from which this book, Superabundance, is suspiciously absent. Somebody get out there and write an entry. I can't imagine nobody has yet. Why is that not out there? There is a reference to, quote, the myth of superabundance. And this is what we're up against. In Stuart Udall's 1964 book, The Quiet Crisis, quote, the myth of superabundance is the belief that Earth has more than sufficient natural resources to satisfy humanity's needs, and that no matter how much of these resources humanity uses, the planet will continuously replenish the supply, unquote. That's supposedly a myth. The myth of superabundance is stuff out there. You know, Julian Simon referred to the ultimate resource, the title of his book, The Ultimate Resource. But the ultimate resource is not a particular physical object. It is, in Julian Simon's words, the capacity for humans to invent and adapt. Now, personally, I think it's virtually self-evident. Given rational premises, and in particular, the understanding that man's mind, reason, is his tool and means of survival, if you understand the role of man's mind in man's survival and flourishing, then it's clear that the ultimate resource is the human resource, the source of all the values that not only make human life livable, but worth living. Now, I'm going to take a quick break because I was watching the chat and we've got comments in the chat, but I don't have any super chat yet. Why do I mention the super chat? Because I need super chat. I need money. I need you to show me that you love me. Show the love. If you have any questions about this topic, any place you want this conversation to go, anything that you want to stand out, if you put it in a super chat, put a couple dollars on it, that will support who? Me? Well, yeah, in a way, it supports the Ayn Rand Center UK. And the Ayn Rand Center UK, the premier organization. Well, probably Ayn Rand Institute. I don't know. In some ways, what ARC UK does is unique and important, and it needs your support. If you're not already a member, you know what to do. Go to aynrandcenter.co.uk, click membership at the top, become a member. I see that in the chat, Robin is already a member because you see the star on his name there of the YouTube channel as well. Very much appreciated for that. But yeah, put in a couple super chats, help us out here, and I will appreciate that. You know, this past weekend, Amy, Nasir, and I, the missus, threw a picnic, Robert's 6th annual rock and roll picnic. And we had a few gate crashers. And in retrospect, I thought we managed the situation well, but I could have been more generous. People who showed up at the picnic who weren't part of the event, but were asking for a bite to eat. I gave out a lot of drinks, but could have been even more generous. Why do I say that? Well, in part 3 of the book, I see in the chat, yo, the missus is here. Yes, yes. Hello, sweetie. But she will remember that, yes, there were people we just naturally let be part of the event, at least briefly. In the book Superabundance, Tupy observes that many people today regard wealth with resentment and envy when he talks in part 3 of the book. And it's a cultural phenomenon, resentment, envy, instead of gratitude. And I love hearing him talk about that. Why should one be grateful for wealth? And in particular, what if you're not particularly wealthy? His co-author, Gail Pooley, gives this great example. Because he is a teacher, he's a professor. And he asks his students, okay, if I were going to make you an offer, how much would I have to offer you to give up your smartphone, your cell phone, your iPhone, your Google, Android, whatever you're carrying? How much money would it take for you to give up carrying a smartphone for the rest of your life. And when you throw the for the rest of your life in, he says the lowest answer he's gotten is $5 million. For $5 million, one of his students would give up carrying a smartphone for the rest of his life. And Pooley makes the point that you have just decided, you have just declared the value of that device to you. You've got a $5 million phone in your pocket. That's what that is worth to you. Technology that didn't exist 30 years ago. If that is not a cause for gratitude, and that's just one example, then I don't know what is. In section 3, talking about the enemies of flourishing, the enemies of abundance, Tupy mentions anti-natalism and anti-humanism. And that was interesting to hear that come up, because anti-natalism is becoming an idea that's not just fringe. And it's the idea that, well, natalism, referring to having children, giving birth, being pregnant, it's the idea that it is wrong to have children. It is wrong to bring new life into the world because life on balance isn't worth living. It's a net negative. And he points out that there are children, and it's heartbreaking because I have seen this, and not just in children, but teenagers, some adults even. There are children who are scared to death that every vacation they take, literally every sandwich they eat, is depleting the resources of Earth and destroying the planet. And just in case you don't fully appreciate how trivially we have scratched the surface of what's wrong with that, of what's available, of what not just human resources, those being the primary, but even resources on the planet are. Consider the energy density of uranium, which is 1 million times higher than a lump of coal. Even if you throw in, because people will complain about that statistic, you should be reading Alex Epstein's book to fully appreciate this. But even if you throw in the processing, the enrichment, for example, that you have to do to bring it to U-235 and actually use it in a reactor, it's still tens to hundreds of thousands of times more energy dense than coal, and blows the efficiency of what Epstein calls unreliables out of the water. But uranium is not the only element on this planet that has that kind of value density. Consider the nutrient density of dirt. And this one surprised even me when I actually started looking it up. Because some people will say, yeah, sure, the Earth is big, but most of it is covered in dirt. It's not useful. I went to the grocery store last week, and the missus, who was in the chat, asked me to pick up some mint, thinking this might have been 10 days ago, maybe just a week. And the bunches of mint that they had at the grocery store were good. They were okay, but a little brown, a little iffy. So I grabbed one of those. And then I saw, oh, they've got fresh mint. They got little plants, these cute little potted plants. You can buy fresh mint and use that. So I grabbed one of those too. Set it on the kitchen windowsill to get a little sunlight. And it's been sitting there for a week. And it turns out the bunch of mint wasn't that bad. So that got used in the kitchen. And the one that I bought, which I swear was this high when I bought it a week ago, maybe 10 days, is now this tall. Now, where did that come from? Well, the answer is it came from the dirt. Apparently, whatever it takes to make all of this is in there. Well, if any of you have a home with a lawn, or if you've done yard work, you actually know that plant life is voracious, and it'll grow anywhere that you don't want it to grow. It won't always grow where you want it to grow. Getting the lawn to grow nicely can be a challenge, but getting the weeds to grow, piece of cake. So I looked up, well, we know, those of us who studied agriculture, that soil does have limits. after a few seasons and a few harvests, it can wear out and it needs to be tilled. But even after tilling it and mixing it all up again, it can be short and needs to rest for a season or two. Or alternately, we can use fertilizer, which strangely enough has been made illegal in some parts of the world. So I looked up, well, what exactly do plants need? What do they get from the soil? We've complained if you buy hydroponically grown strawberries, for example, they just don't seem to have that oomph, that zing. They taste, well, it might be psychological, but to me, they taste watery if they're grown in water. So I thought, well, what is in plants? How is it that something like this just becomes something like that? All I did is add a little water to it. And it turns out that over 90% of what plants need is water or components of water, carbon dioxide and H2O. They need nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, manganese, iron, molybdenum, copper, zinc, boron, chlorine, and nickel. All simple elements, some of which come from more complex molecules like manganese and molybdate and borate. But it turns out what plants need is really, really simple. And small wonder that if you'd asked them 40 years ago, will we have blown the carrying capacity of Mother Earth? If the population gets to be 7.8 billion people, they will say yes. People will be starving in the streets. Tupy and Pooley point out films like Soylent Green were not that outlandish. People thought we were going to be resorting to cannibalism or at least mass starvation. And we got 8 billion people on the planet. We're at nearly 8 billion people. And what is the food problem in America? It's obesity. And other parts of the world are now starting to see that. It's amazing that there are still doomsayers in 2020. We are living on a massive, inconceivably massive ball of resources. And we have barely scratched the surface. We have barely scratched the surface of Earth while we are concurrently looking out at the stars. There's a meme posted on Facebook earlier today. How did I survive without Bluetooth and a USB slot in my car radio? Driving someone else's car, it seems like the Stone Age. And then there's a photo of 28 3.5-inch floppy disks. These are the 28 installation disks of Windows 95. I was a field IT technician before I became a public intellectual, and I remember loading all those diskettes onto a CD-ROM just to make it easier to load. Now, most people don't even have CD-ROM drives anymore. They still sell DVDs at the store, but does anybody still have a DVD player? Strangest thing. During a previous episode, I discussed one of the early mass-produced CPUs, the Intel 4004. The engineer types will appreciate this out there because there's a website, which I've linked to in the show notes at facebook.com/Robert Nasir, where you can actually now see the schematic diagram of the Intel 4004. It's fun because the schematics, that used to be super private stuff. They share that information, but now you can see the layout of all 2,300 transistors on this one microchip. Except it's not very micro when you look at it compared to what we've got now. That was 1971. Apple's new M2 chip just came out. They just did big announcements of the new A16 chip and the new iPhone's 14. The chip has, 32 billion transistors. Can you imagine what a schematic how on earth are we even designing circuits, much less implementing those in 5 nanometer processes? But the reason I say all that is not because, oh, wow, look how much better things are than they were 40, 50 years ago. No, that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is consider this. Consider what's coming in the next 5, 10, 25 years. Well, of course, you can't. because you don't know. And that's one of the strengths of this book, Superabundance, is that these guys get it. They know that in 5 years, in 10 years, in 25 years, amazing things are going to happen, and that none of us know what those things are, which means they can't be centrally planned. They certainly can't be forced. That kind of innovation can't even be properly subsidized because we don't know what it's going to look like in 25 years. It's all too easy to think that, there's been superabundance until now, but, and this goes out to my objectivist friends. There's been superabundance until now. Sure, we, on average, are producing more than we're consuming. And the super part, which is we're doing that at an even greater rate every year. But these are unprecedented times, and it may all be for naught. Everything is going to hell in a handbasket. I would submit, and before I wrap up here, I've got to say thank you for the super chats. Obviously, Kindred Amy, well, we know who that is, and she says she loves the mint plant. I do too, and at some point we should be putting it in a mint julep or something else, but I don't know, it's just so charming. I hate to cut it down and eat it. It's funny how you get attached to literally anything. Enric is in there as well in the super chat, says thanks, Robert, and thank you, Enric, very much appreciated. And equal to reality. Keep it up, Robert. I miss having both of you. Oh, believe me, I miss having Amy on too. She sneaks into the chat most of the time, but it's just not the same. We'll see. We'll see as things develop, as the show progresses, as things evolve. Because as I say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20, I don't know, that sounds too long. 5 weeks, 5 months from now, who knows what could happen? That sounds better. I submit, culturally, we are following a similar progression as food production and manufacturing and distribution of information and entertainment and technology and all of the other innovations, which 5 years from now, we won't believe what happened. 10 years from now, we'll be shocked that things kept getting better. 25 years from now, we won't recognize what's happening. Hopefully, we're all still around to see that, those who are a little older. But I submit, and I cannot prove this, but to me it's virtually self-evident, that culturally we are following a similar progression. We just can't see it because we can see everything that's wrong. And being philosophy-minded, we can see the very real threats, the very real ways in which it could all go wrong. But we can't see everything that's going right other than look at the results. Look at the world out there, and I don't mean the news. I don't mean the politics of the day. Politics of the day are very sad. We lost the great lady today. I'm anti-monarchy, obviously, as much as anybody is, but if there was ever a great queen, Queen Elizabeth II, so amazing, in office since 1952. Somebody had to do that job. She was the right person for the job. Good luck to, I was going to say Prince Charles. Good luck to King Charles, but I really think it was time to abolish the monarchy. It could have gone out with the great lady, and we didn't. So very sad. But again, I submit that we are on track for everything to continue to get better, even culturally. Now, that one's controversial because we haven't gotten much better philosophically. The objectivist movement has grown. We've got more philosophy professors in the schools out there than we ever have before. We've now got multiple organizations doing this work. You decide for yourself which ones are credible, but there's no question but that there's more people doing more things than ever before. Certainly more copies of Ayn Rand's books continue to be sold. There is no reason to assume the world will become objectivist in my lifetime. But there's also no reason to assume that the world's going to fall apart in my lifetime, and every reason to assume that things will continue on the trends they're on. For more on superabundance, incidentally, I do recommend the interview that Marian Tupy and Gail Pooley had on the Michael Shermer show. That was a good interview. I gave that one a listen. It's linked in my show notes, facebook.com/Robert Nasir. What I don't recommend is the interview that they did with Jordan Peterson. That one should have been a good interview, but Jordan Peterson kept acting like Jordan Peterson. So I do not recommend that one. But if you have any doubts about the carrying capacity of planet Earth, or about the prosperity to be expected in the future, if we can keep enough people rational enough, long enough, I strongly encourage reading the books that I put in the show notes, including Enlightenment Now and The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, and Alex Epstein's outstanding books, Fossil Future. I just made the same mistake I've criticized before, Fossil Future, and, see, tongue twisting, because I was about to say The Moral Basis of Fossil Fuels. And also some of the older books like Matt Ridley's of The Rational Optimist, but especially this book on superabundance. I strongly encourage you to pick it up. It's available as a Dead Tree version, or I've got the Kindle version, Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet by Marian L. Tupy and Gail L. Pooley. Those are both a gentleman, by the way, Marian and Gail, which sounds a little funny, but hey, one of our great heroes who unfortunately was a flawed hero also had the name Gail, spelled a little bit differently. An outstanding book, an outstanding resource. Naturally, I like it because it fits in with my project, which is to encourage people to embrace their own best lives. And that requires a substantial amount of optimism. And on that note, I've got to say kudos to ARI, which just released Yaron Brooks' OCON 2022 talk, Why I Am Still an Optimist. Well worth watching, also linked in my show notes, added to my 2022 Optimism playlist. Again, if you are one of those folks who thinks things are getting worse, I won't criticize you, even though I think it's self-evidently wrong. Instead, I will encourage you watch that Optimism 2022 playlist. And I would especially like to thank each and every one of you for joining me. And join me next week for another thrill-packed episode. And in the meantime, I wish each and every one of you a prosperous, abundant, flourishing, and super abundant life on Earth.